Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a great method of painting a Leviathan Siege Dreadnought in the colours of the World Eaters Legion for the Horus Heresy by Games Workshop. Now, being in the colours of the World Eaters, this means this Dreadnought is going to be mostly painted with white with some bits of blue on there. So we're going to be showing you a great way of painting white armour onto a war machine. But also being the World Eaters, it is of course going to have lots of blood splatter on there too, so we're going to be showing you a great way of doing that. And all the methods and techniques we're going to be showing you here can be applied to lots and lots of different World Eaters war machines. So we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you at the desk. When it comes to painting the World Eaters from the days of the Horus Heresy, what we need to do is start out with a white or an off-white undercoat that will work well for that mainly white armour colour scheme that they have. So in this case, what I've used is some grey Seer spray from Citadel, although any sort of white or off-white will do just fine here, because later on what we're going to do is actually establish what that main white is going to be. The undercoat like this just means that it's going to be nice and easy to do that. But you'll notice as well, what I've got is some sub-assemblies here, because I've kept both the arms separate from the Dreadnought. Now, whether you're doing the one with the drill arms and the close combat weapons like we've got here, or the one with the guns, the same is true. Though this one with the close combat weapons does mean we can do some cool effects later on with the blood. The same is true if you've gone for the guns, because what we need to do is to access the internal structure of the machine before we start doing the armour. And this is a rule that plays out very well for all kinds of different machines from Warhammer 40,000 and from the Horus Heresy too. And it's because these war machines tend to have quite a detailed internal structure that's mostly metallic, then they have the main armour colour on top of that. And when it comes to things like Knights and Titans, it's quite easy to keep that armour plating separate and paint it separate and glue it all together at the end. A Dreadnought, however, is a bit different because these armour plates often form an integral part of the main structure, so we need to approach it a little bit differently. And that is to go into it doing all the messy stages first of all and trying to minimise any splashing that might appear on the armour, so when it comes to doing the armour, that part is quicker and easier. So in the case of this Dreadnought, keeping those arms separate is really going to help out with that, because if we take a look at the shoulder, you can see there's a lot of detail on the inside of here that we need to paint silver, and it's visible when the arms are on, but it is quite obscured because of the shape of that big shoulder plate just there. Now you can imagine painting all that part silver on the inside at this stage. If the arm's glued on, you're going to get a lot on the shoulder there, and it's going to mean quite a bit of work to clean that up later on. So if you keep it separate, it's much quicker and much easier. So you don't have to do it, but if you do it, you'll find that painting it is much faster as you go along. And we are going to start out with that internal part there. What we need is a dark silver. So the one I've got for this is some Leadbelcher, and to apply it, I've got an old rough brush, which you can see has definitely seen better days. This is a medium base brush from Citadel, but I keep it around because it's really useful for phases like this, where we're just going to be quite rough as we apply it. What we want to do is just get some of this paint onto the palette as usual, thin down with a little bit of water, and just being careful with this brush because it does soak up a lot of water very quickly. Don't want to overdo it. I want to bring it down to around about this sort of point here, and then make sure it hasn't picked up too much of the paint. So I'm just removing some excess there on the palette. And with this then, we're just looking for anything that's machinery and base coating it with this colour. So any internal parts that are mechanical. So definitely all around here, I'm going to block it in entirely, and you can see doing this now, it's nice and easy to get to all of this. And it will need 2 coats just to make sure it's a solid silver before we move on. Now, inevitably, you are going to encounter parts where you'll get some of this onto the armour, but just try and keep it to a minimum. So for example, around here, as I get to this part of armour on the back, I just want to be careful working it in there. I get it a little bit, but as long as it's kept to a minimum, then it'll be absolutely fine. Now, you will find there are a few bits of metal that are decorative. So for example, on the front here, we've got this kind of skull and lightning bolt motif. Avoid the more decorative parts because we'll come back to those later on in a much more detailed way. Instead, just look for the machinery such as the flames down here and be sure to get all of those at this stage. Once you've got all that silver blocked in, including on the arms, the next thing to do is to apply our first wash into the miniature. And here what we're going to be doing is applying a black wash to start to darken things down and get some definition in there. So for this, I'm going to use some Nuln Oil, and to apply it, you want to go for a large to medium sized brush. I have here a medium shade brush from Citadel for this. And what we're looking to do is to be generous in applying this across all that silver. So use a palette if you want to, and I like to use the palette just to control exactly how much is going on at once. If you're feeling a little bit bravey, you can of course go straight from the pot if you want to. Whatever the case, what you want to do is load up that good amount on your brush and start painting it all over the silver. So for example, in here, I just want to apply it directly over the top of it like that, so it runs into all the recesses and gives us that definition. Now be aware when you're applying this quantity of wash onto an area like this, it will tend to run down and pool on areas, so you've got to keep an eye on how it settles. You want it to stay fairly even, so we're not looking at overdoing it. So you can see it's generous, but not too much here because it's sitting fairly well where I'm applying it. But If you do put too much on, what you'll get is this sort of thing happening. So if you look underneath the armour there, if I really cake it on like that, it starts running down and clogging that detail in there. Now if you spot that happening, you just need to use your brush just to manipulate it around and just redistribute it around the miniature so it doesn't clog up too much, because if it dries that way, it'll look really horrible. So just move it around, get it down to around about that point, and then you can move on. Now as you're doing this, do your best to keep it off the white armour if you can, but don't worry if you splash it a little bit, for example around there, because we'll just need it later on. But once you have got it all over the silver, give it around about 45 minutes to dry. Once that black wash is dry on all the metal, the next thing we're going to do is to start to highlight some of it, because we do have another wash to do later on. But before we darken it down even more, we just want to make some of the edges pop out a little bit more so they show through as we put that next wash on. So here what we need to do is to dry brush it, because there's lots of texture here to grab onto. And so for this, I'm going to use some Necron compound. And to apply it, what I've got is one of these dry brushes from the Army Painter. So a hobby dry brush, this one. It's got some nice springy bristles on it, so good for the sort of dry brushing we're doing here, where we're looking to catch the edges more than flat areas. So we just need some of the paint on the brush, and then get some tissue paper and use it to work into the bristles and remove the excess too. We want to bring it down to around about this sort of point here, you see, so there's no longer much paint appearing on the texture of that tissue, so that's looking good. And then with this, all we need to do is start flicking it back and forth across all this metal. So around here, for example, I want to go back and forth so the colour catches the edges and gives us a sharp highlight on those corners. Once you finish that dry brush, the next thing we're going to do is to move into add a little bit more variety onto the metal, because right now what we've got is some massive blocks of silver, and left like this they're just a little bit uninteresting. So what we're going to do is use another metallic colour now just to pick out a few details to break it up and make it more interesting to look at. So for this, what we're going to use is a brass colour. I've got some Balthazar gold for this, and to apply it I've gone for a size 1 brush from Artist Opus here. So if you want to go for a Citadel brush, you're looking at something like a medium layer, whatever you prefer, just make sure it's got a good point on it so you've got that control over the paint here. And as ever, what we need to do is just make sure it's nicely thinned down, and then it's a matter of just going around the miniature and the various assemblies looking for anything that you want to pick out with this brass colour. So for example, if we take a look at the side of the body just here, what we're looking at are things like this little round part we've got here. It's going to block this in, so we've got that little bit of colour there breaking up the silver. And also if we go further around here, we've got things like this panel that goes inside just here, so that's another good thing to pick out. But you can see it's really just entirely up to you what you do here, but it's just a case of just looking around, looking for little details like this and picking them out. And here we have the model with those little brass details picked out, and you can see on the arm I just did some in the joint just there, and on the hull you can see I've just done a few little bits scattered around, including on the exhausts at the top here, and a few little parts sort of going down the legs just there. With that done, we're now ready for that second wash, and this time what we want is a dark brown wash, and it's going to give a much more grimy appearance to it, so perfect for a machine like this. The one I'm going to use is some Agrax Earthshade, and to apply it, what we're going to do is go through the exact same procedure as what we did with the black. So I'm once again using that medium shade brush from Citadel, and just like before, I'm going to use the palette to control exactly how much is going at once, although feel free to go straight from the pot if you want to. Whatever you choose, it's just a matter of getting that generous amount on your brush and then painting it all over the metallics. So we're looking for both colours this time, the bronze and the silver, just paint it all over, working it into all the nooks and crannies, and like before, just making sure it doesn't build up too much in any one area. That wash is now completely dry as well, and you can see we've got that nice grimy appearance on the metal, and it's also darkened it down a little bit too, which is going to form a really nice contrast against that white armour. But before we do, we'll move on to that white armour. There's a bit more to do on the internal mechanics, and that is first of all to return to another highlight, again dry brushing using Necron compound. And this is going to highlight that silver once again to help it pop, but also at the same time it's going to highlight all that brass. So what we want to do is to do a light dry brush just like we did before. So again, I've gone for that hobby dry brush here from the Army Painter, and just like before, so you need to work the paint into the brush until there's not much left appearing on the tissue paper. So really go at it till you're getting this sort of appearance just here, and with that prepared, we're then ready to start applying it. And once again, it's a matter of dry brushing across all the metal so that this time you get the silver and the bronze as well. I've finished that dry brushing, and you can see now we've got a nice highlight on all those metal details of both colours. In particular, if you look at the back of the machine just here, you can see we've even got it on the exhausts there on those bronze parts. And well, with that done, we're now going to move on to some finer details that appear in the chassis, because now what we need to do is start picking out all the cables that appear there. The most obvious examples are on the arms, but there are some on that central part of the chassis, so make sure you catch all of those as well. And for this, what we need to do is start out with an off black, so basically a really dark grey. I'm going to use some Death Reaper for this, but if you want to use a Citadel paint, paint, then Corvus Black is the one to use. After that, we need a black wash, and for this I'm going to use some Nuln Oil, and then to highlight it we need a dark grey. I'm going to use some Dungeon Stone Grey here, but again, if you want to go for Citadel, then you want to go for something like Mechanica Standard Grey, which is similar, and for this what you can then do is pick out all the details. But first of all, what we need is that off black for the base coat, so I've got some Death Reaper here. What we need to do is just get some of this onto the palette, so you just need a little dollop here, and you can see I've moved over to my wet palette now for this. And then what you need to do is get a brush that's got a good point on it so you have that control, a sort of medium-sized one. So I've gone back to my size one here from Artistopus. If you want to go for a Citadel one, then you're looking at about a medium layer. Whatever you choose though, it's a matter of making sure the paint's nicely thinned down so you've got it under control. So just adding little bits of water until it's about this sort of consistency. And once you've got that ready, then we just need to look out for those cables. Now, as I mentioned, these ones on the arms here are really obvious. So we're looking at these parts. We just want to block these in, just being careful of the metal bands that go around them. But bear in mind there are some on the chassis too, so be sure to get those as well. Once you've finished the base coat and all those cables, the next thing to do is to apply a black wash over each one using the same brush as what you used for the base coat. And in this case I'm using Nuln Oil, just carefully applied in between these metal bands. Once that wash is completely dry, we're then ready to move on to highlight these cables, and for this what we need is a dark grey, and what we're aiming to do is to apply a line towards the top quarter a bit where the light catches it. So you can see in this case it's going to be gently along here, just in this downward sweeping motion using the tip of the brush. Now because you need to use the tip here, I recommend switching to a smaller brush. In this case I'm using a size 0 from Artistopus. With that, those cables are highlighted, and so now I can move on to the next step, which is actually going to be to glue the arms on, because now we've painted all that interior detail in there, and we can move on to the armour on top, and you can see the armour's nice and easy to access now, because all that interior is done. So we need to glue these on, and well, for this, what we need to do now is just an extra step before we actually put any glue on there, because the arms stick out quite a bit, so during the course of gameplay, they're likely to take some wear and tear, and if we glue them as is, what we'll be doing is gluing paint to paint, which means the arms will break off very easily. So what we need to do is just remove a little bit of that paint at the contact points that we glue plastic to plastic, and if you do this you'll find it's much more secure and it won't break anywhere near as easily. So to do that, all you need to do is to get hold of a tool like this. I've got a file. This is a cross-section one that's more like a triangle because it gives a nice point on the end of it there. That's not really sharp but will come in useful later on. If you can't get hold of one of these though, you could use an old scraping tool. It's really your choice, but with it what we need to do is just use it to remove a bit of the plastic, and we're looking at this top of this ball socket joint right here. All you need to do is carefully move in and then just lightly file away like that, just removing a little bit of that paint and the undercoat, just taking it down to the plastic underneath. So you can see some of it's showing through there like that. Doesn't have to be loads, just a circle kind of about that size will be enough. Then what we need to do is a similar thing on the inside of that socket joint, but because it's deeper in, instead we can't use the flat of the file, that's where I've got that point on it, because with this what I can do is just start scraping like that, and all you do is just work your way around to reveal some of that plastic, just in a circular motion. And there we go. You see, I've got a nice round bit of plastic showing through there. And so with that done, we're then ready to stick them together. And for this, all you need is some super glue. Don't use plastic glue, even though we are sticking plastic to plastic, because it will get out, it'll melt the paint, and it can ruin your miniature. So definitely use super glue here, and you won't need very much either. All you got to do is just put a little bit on the contact point, just being careful it doesn't flow out too quickly. So just gently let some run down the nib, and then you just want to carefully put it onto the very end there like that. So just make sure it's not too much. There we go. And then with this, all we've got to do is put it into place. So it's just a matter of deciding on the pose and then sticking it together. And here we have the Leviathan Dreadnought with the arms glued on, and so now ready to start painting in all that armor plating. And when doing this, what we're actually going to do is start out with the blue rather than the white. And the reason is because the way that we've been painting it so far has kept most of the armor still white, even though it's a bit messy. It means we can use that to then work out where the blue's going to be. So we'll block all that in. And once we're happy with that, we can then return to the white and actually neaten it up as we get that smooth base coat of it. So what we need to do is pick which blue we want to use. And in this case, I'm going to go for some Outdoor Guard blue. And the official images of the World Eaters, they can be a little bit inconsistent with the blue, so you just want something like this that you like for your miniatures. Anyway, for this what we need to do is pick an appropriate size brush to apply it, and I'm starting with a size 1 from Artistopus here, though you might want to have a larger brush on hand for some of the more open, larger plates. The choice really is yours, but throughout this it's just a matter of, as ever, just getting that paint on your palette and thin down with that little bit of water so it's nice and smooth, and then it's just a matter of deciding what parts you want to be blue and then just blocking them in. So what I want to do here is sort of emulate a classic World Eaters colour scheme, in that I'm going to be looking for the shoulders first first of all, so I'm going to paint both shoulders blue. I'm also going to be doing these backpack vents around here blue to be like the backpack on a normal World Eater. I'm going to do one of the knees blue as well to break things up a little bit down here. So we'll start on this shoulder plate, and what we want to do is just make sure we apply it all the way over. And you can see it's a little bit uneven as I do this first coat, so just make sure you apply it as 2 thin coats to get that even coverage before you move on. And as you're doing this, it's just a matter of taking your time and being as neat as possible whenever you get close to that silver detail that we've already done. So for example, as I get around here, I'm just going to really take my time on this plate, making sure it doesn't go onto that silver beneath. And here we have the Dreadnought with those blue details blocked in, and you can see also we've got them on the back just there too. And with that done, we can now move on to that white to establish the main colour for that. And for this, what we're going to use is some Corax white, which can be a little bit thick straight out of the pot, so just be sure to really mix it before you start using it. Make sure it's mixed properly and so it's nice and smooth. And to apply it, you can see now I've got 2 brushes. I've got my medium shade brush from Citadel, and I've also got my size 1 from Artistopus once again. And this is because these white details are now quite large, so I'm going to be starting out with this medium shade brush, because with this what we can do is cover large areas very quickly. And here we go, you can see the colour's quite a nice cold colour. It's just a slight off-white really. It's a very, very light grey really. And with it, what we want to do is just make sure it's nice and thin, smooth down with that little bit of water. And then all you got to do is just start blocking in all the white armour, which is all those remaining armour plates. So for example, this one here, see, having a large brush means we can paint this nice and quick. But as you get to finer details, so for example, as we start getting around here, this is what we've got the smaller brush for, where we can switch to it. And this just gives us more control as we start to go around these details. And there we are, the white's been neatened up, and so now I can move on to the next detail we need to block in, which is going to be that decorative metal. Remember that bronze I mentioned earlier on for things like the skull and the lightning bolts on the chest. For this, what we're going to do is return to Balthazar gold, only this time we're going to be applying it very neatly. So what I've got for this is a size 0 brush from Artistopus, and we're just looking to get a small amount of this ready, nicely thinned down as ever, so we've got that control over it. And the key thing is having that sharp point on your brush. So just make sure you bring the bristles together on the palette, and then when you're ready, it's a matter of picking these parts out. So depending on how you built your Dreadnought, there might be some different parts to do here, but in the case of this one, what we've got is this skull in the centre just here, and we've also got the lightning bolts, which do stand out from the surrounding armour, so if you're careful, you can approach with the side of the brush and gently skim along them like that, just to pick out that raised detail. So just very carefully along areas like there. Now, in addition, there's another bit I want to pick out, and that is the band that goes around this sort of speaker grill thing we've got on the face. So here, what we're looking at is just getting this bit of metal going around here. Once you're happy with those decorative elements blocked in, the next thing we need to do is apply a wash to all these new colours we've added in, so the white, the blue and that brass. And this time, rather than just washing it all over quickly, we need to be much more precise because of that really pale colour scheme that we got, because of that white. So here what we need is some Agrax Earthshade once again, but to apply it, go for a small brush. I'm going to still use my size 0 here. If you're going for a Citadel brush, then I recommend going for a small layer, because what you need is that good point on it. Because with this, once you've got on the palette and you've got that puddle, just remove excess off on the palette, just bring the bristles to a good point. So you can see the brush is loaded up, but I still have the point there on the bristles, because with this, what we're looking for is all the recesses on the blue and the white, such as these ones on the top just here. What we want to do is, as neatly as possible, just run it directly into those recesses of the panel. So along there, on these parts just here, so you see just letting it wash into the recess part, so as we get that definition and to help them pop out a little bit more. Now, when you get to the decorative brass, rather than painting it into the recesses, instead, just let it flow over the top of it. So for example, on this part on the chest here, it's painted directly over the skull, so it goes in the eyes and everything. And the same is true as we go out these lightning bolts along here too. Once you finish doing that recess shading, you can see now all those recesses pop out really nicely, really defining the shape of the miniature. And well, with that done, we can now move on to the next step, which is to start to highlight it. And before you do the highlighting, just check around the miniature quickly to make sure the wash hasn't splashed on the flat of any of the armour plates. And if it has, just neaten those up a little bit with the relevant colour. And then you're ready to move on to your highlights. We're going to start out with the white, which is the largest one by far. And for this, what we need is a pure white. So here I'm going to use some white star, though any pure white will do. For example, matte white from the Army Painter. Whatever you choose, what you need is a fine brush now. So I'm using my size 0 once again, and you can see I've got a dollop of the paint already on the palette. With this, what we're looking to do is to accentuate all the sharp edges across all the white armour plates. So essentially, edge highlighting is what we're doing here. And to do this, what you need to do is just make sure the paint's thin correctly. And we're looking for the sweet spot really, where it's flowing well from the brush, but not so well that it's flowing out of control. So it's a little bit inky, but not too inky. I've got it a little bit too thin at this stage here, and you can see I started thinning it down next to the main body of the paint, because it means I can just bring some more pigment into it if we need to make it a little bit thicker. So that's kind of what we're looking for just there. So with that prepared, just make sure you don't have loads on your brush because this can easily just blob everywhere. So we just want to make sure there's only a small amount on there, about this sort of thing here. And you can always test it on your palette by just having a go at painting some lines. And you can see it's flowing really nicely from my brush now, and I'm getting lots of white lines. And even though it looks like there's not much paint on my brush, it just keeps going and going. So that's the ideal sort of consistency as to what we want. So with that ready then, what we're looking for is all those sharp edges. And for a lot of them, it's actually really easy to approach them using your side of your brush like this, about 45 degrees from the flat, and just skim along the edge. And this way you get that nice bright white line on that edge like that, giving it that really lovely highlight. And it's just a matter of just turning the model as you need to remain comfortable as you follow it all the way around. Now you won't always be able to use the side of your brush because some of the recesses are a little bit too fine for it, such as those panel lines we got on the top of the carapace just here. You can see these bits here. In this case, what we need is the tip of the brush, so it's a matter of just lining it up so you're painting downwards in this smooth motion towards yourself, and just neatly follow the edge of that recess as closely as you can so the highlight follows it along like that, just to give it a bit more definition. And with that, the white is now all highlighted, and we've actually passed what is easily the longest stage of painting the miniature, and from this point on things are going to be much quicker as we move on to smaller details, starting out by edge highlighting all of that blue. Now for this, what we're going to use is some Horus blue, and then we've got that decorative bronze. For this, we're going to use some Sycorax bronze. And both these are going to be using the same technique, so once again, edge highlighting just like we were doing in that previous step. So starting out with Horus blue, what we're looking to do is to get some of this on the palette, and then make sure it's thin so it's got that nice consistency where it flows really well from the brush, but again isn't overloaded so it blobs out of control or anything. So bringing it down to about that point, making sure the brush isn't overloaded, and then we're looking for all the sharp edges on the blue armor just like we did with the white, so wherever possible just looking to use the side of the brush and skim along all of those edges. And once the blue is done, we're then ready to move on to Sycorax bronze, and this is another edge highlight, but this time it's going to be for the decorative bronze that appears on the chest. And with that, the decorative detail's now highlighted too, and you can see the model is well on the way to being finished. But what we now need to do is return to one of the melee weapons, because we're looking at the claw right now. Because on there are these 3 blades, which right now look a little bit too grimy and a bit too mechanical, and we want to make them look a bit cleaner to make them, well, appear like they're actually really sharp. So what we need to do now is return to some Leadbelcher to layer them to make them nice and shiny, then we'll highlight them with some Stormhost silver to finish them off. But first of all, we need Leadbelcher, and to apply this I've gone for my size 1 brush here because it's quite large open areas that we're doing. What we're looking to do is just do some smooth layering though. So as ever, make sure the paint's nicely thinned down, bring it down to about this point here. And then what we're aiming to do is to paint it onto the actual cutting parts of these blades. So if we take a look at this one, for example, what we want to do is layer this onto the flat of it and going down the sharp part just here, so all the way across, but just being careful not to go quite into the recess where it meets the housing along here. Now that claw is nice and shiny, we're ready to move on to highlighting it, and for this what we need is some Stormhost silver, and this is going to be another edge highlight, so following it all the way around, including on that cutting edge, and if you want to, you can even add a little effect on here, giving the impression of some scratches, just to make it look like it's, well, seen some action. And if you want to, it's just a matter of just doing a few light lines just coming down here, just to give that impression of a few scratches emanating up from the blade. And with that highlight applied, you can see now the claw is nice and shiny and standing out as a sharp weapon, and also it appears to have seen a little bit of action too. And so with that done, we're now ready to move on to painting the eyes. And because the eye lenses are quite hidden away because of that high collar here, what we're going to do is go for a very bright glowing effect to make them really pop. And so for this, what we need to do is start out by returning to that pure white. So here I'm going to use some White Star. After that, we need a bright red contrast paint, so I'm going to use some Blood Angels Red for this, and then we'll move on to some highlights, starting out with some Fire Dragon Bright, followed by some Uriel Yellow. But first of all, what we need is that white, so White Star is what I'm going to use here, and to apply it I've gone right down to a size 00 brush from Artist Opus, so a really small brush, really good point on it. From Citadel you'll definitely want something like a small layer, but just something that's got a good point so you have lots of control, because with this colour what we're aiming to do is just get a small amount ready as if we're going to edge highlight it, but this time we're looking at painting just a line in the middle of each eye. So you might have to hold it at some funny angles to actually reach these, but what we're aiming to do is to gently move in and just paint a line in the very middle of it. So we're looking at very carefully in there, so you see in the middle of the eye is now brighter white. With that initial white applied, we're then ready to move on to Blood Angels Red, and with this what we're looking to do is to paint it into the whole recess of the eye lens here. So again, you might have to hold it at a bit of a weird angle to reach it, but what we're looking at doing is just painting it carefully into this area so that it goes red, but it's a bit brighter in the middle because of that white line that we added in the previous step. Once that contrast paint is completely dry, we can then move on to Fire Dragon Bright, and with this what we're looking to do is again paint that fine line in the middle of each eye lens, so just like with the white we did in the previous stage. And this way we'll get a really nice bright orange just in the middle of the eye, just very gently applied into this area here to start to build up that bright glowing effect. And then finally, we're ready to move on to Uriel Yellow, and with this we're looking to again paint a little bit of this colour in the middle of the eye, but just a little bit less than we had with the orange in the previous step. So we're just looking at a very small amount just around about here to finish that glowing appearance. Now once you've done this on both eyes, you're then ready to apply the decals to your miniature, and of course it's entirely your choice exactly how many you apply and where you put them. But once you have finished applying them, we'll then be ready to move on to the next phase of painting the miniature. And here we have the Leviathan Siege Dreadnought with those decals applied, and you can see now it looks nice and clean, like it's just walked off the factory floor. However, we think this doesn't quite suit the World Eater's character because, of course, it is going to get involved in a lot of fighting, so we want to show that on the Dreadnought now. And yes, this will include blood, but that comes later, because if you want to do this sort of weathering, the first thing you have to do is to look to sort of chip into the paintwork, so the physical damage to it, before you move on to more atmospheric effects like dust and, of course, that blood. So we're going to start with the chipping, and for this what we need is a sort of dark, dirty kind of grey colour. So I'm going to use some Skaven Blight Dinge for it. And to apply it, I've got two tools. I've got a really fine brush, but I'm actually going to be starting out with a bit of sponge that I've torn just here, because this allows us to get a really random sort of speckling on it, so ideal for this sort of scratching. And to do this, all you got to do is just get some of the paint on it, and then on your regular palette, just start dotting it away, removing the excess paint. And to begin with, you'll have to get rid of quite a lot, so you can see I'm being quite sharp with it at the moment, getting rid of all that excess paint. But as it starts to become a little bit lighter and you start getting this kind of appearance, you see, so much less, that's what we're looking for, because once it's doing that, what we can do is start applying this onto the armour, and this will be both the blue and the white. What we do is look for areas where it's going to be scratched to the front here from gunfire or just some debris or something, and all you do is just start dotting it on like that, and you see you get that really nice random speckling that looks like it's the undercoated metal showing through beneath the paintwork. So you can do as much of this as you like, of course, but you can see it's quite random as you do this, so in some areas it can be quite tricky to make it go exactly where you want. So once you've got some on there, if you want to, you can then switch to that fine brush, which is why I've got a small one here, that size 00 from Artistopus. With this, what we can do is just get some of the paint thinned down in the usual way, as if we're going to be edge highlighting with it. But with this, what we can do is now start directing where the scratches are going to be. So you can start connecting things and start making them a little bit bigger, start creating particular shapes if you want to. So for example, if we take a look at these ones around here, what I can do is just start using the tip of the brush just to connect some of them with like little sharp movements like this, just to create bigger scratches in a controlled manner as to where we want them. And this means that by doing it like this, what you can do is really build them up in particular areas really. So for example, on the bottom of the feet, anywhere you want them to be. So now it's just a matter of doing this for as long as you want really, but remember, once you get to a point where you're happy with it, be sure to stop there, because you can always come back later to add some more if you want to, but it's much trickier to take this away if you think you've done too much. I finished that sponging, and you can see now we've got lots of little scratches all across the miniature, and they're more intense towards the bottom of the feet and also around those hands too. And if you wanted to, you could leave it here, but if you really want to sell this effect to make it look like it's really etched into the armour, what we can do is a little optical illusion. And to do this, what you'll need are the highlight colours that we used for the armour. So in this case, that's going to be White Star followed by Hoeth Blue. Now, if you want to do this, what you need to do is just get some of this ready using a small brush. I'm back to using that size 00 here, because you've got some more White Star just here. And what we're going to do with this is apply it as a highlight directly beneath these scratches. And you don't have to do all of them, because obviously there's quite a lot, but the larger ones certainly are what to do this with. And what we do is just get a small amount ready, and then look for these scratches. And what we're going to do is just start applying it directly beneath. So look at these ones going up here, the areas such as this one here, and you just start dotting it on directly under it like that. So you get that little bit of white there, and there, these ones there, that one there. And just work around these ones too. You see it's just little dotting, and I'm just looking for the larger ones and just touching it underneath those parts. And if you look at these ones now, compared to the surrounding ones, you can see how they have the impression that they're actually etched into the armour plating as opposed to these ones, which look a little bit lighter. So again, it's entirely up to you whether you do this, but if you do decide to do it, it's just a matter of dotting along, and for the white, just making sure we get all these larger ones such as around here. Once that's done on the white, we're then ready to move on to the blue, doing the exact same technique, so using Hoeth Blue as a highlight this time, once again highlighting beneath all the scratches, especially those larger ones, just to give that impression that they're etched into the armour. And there we are, the blue scratch has been highlighted too, and so now we're going to do just a little bit more scratching, and this is actually going to be over the decals to help embed them in a little bit more with the rest of the paintwork, as if they've taken a bit of damage and chipped off too. And for this, what we need to do is return to the colours that are beneath them. So we're going to show this using Corax White, but on the blue parts it's exactly the same thing using Outdoor Guard Blue, so whichever colours you use for that initial base tone there. So I just need a little bit of Corax White, and I'm using that size 00 brush once again, and with this, what we're looking to do is that same technique when we were doing the scratches by hand, when we were doing that initial chipping, so they're very small movements, just little bits. So for example, if we take a look at the little hound symbol we've got just here, what we can do with this colour now is just etch into it ever so slightly with a few scratches, and doing this just gives the impression that's been painted on as opposed to being just a decal. And with that, the chipping is now complete, and so we're ready to move on to our next effect, which is going to be that slightly more atmospheric one, because now we're going to start working outwards. The next thing we want to do is to have some grimy streaks coming down from various details in the miniature. So things like dirt, rust, that sort of thing, running downwards with water splashing off it, things like rainwater, that kind of thing. And for this, what I've got is some enamel paint. I've got this one right here. This is Rust Streaks from AK Interactive. And what we're going to do is apply some of this, and because it's enamel, what we can then do is use some thinners to adjust it and play around with it and get some nice realistic effects with it. If you've never used this before, it's actually much easier to use than you might think, so we'll show you just now. But to do it, what we need is some thinners, and I've got 2 bottles of it. I've got this one from Humbrol, and then I've also got another one from AK Interactive. Now you might be wondering why I've got 2, and the reason is because one of them is going to be used to wash my brushes, and the other one is going to be used to play around with the effect on the miniature. Because the one to wash my brush is the Humbrol one, you can see it's quite dirty. I don't want to get that on the actual miniature itself, so that's why I've got some clean with the AK Interactive. And I've purposely picked 2 products from different companies here, so the bottles are very different, and so this way I don't get them mixed up. But to do it, what we need to do is start out by applying those rust streaks on. So what we're going to do is open this up, and what we're looking to do with this is to apply it onto areas where you get this sort of grimy streak coming down from the vehicle. So there we go. To apply it, I'm going to go for an older, finer brush. So I've got an old small layer brush here from Citadel, and I've just marked the back of it with a little blue dot, just so I know which brush it is, so I don't get it mixed up with my regular ones. And with it, what I'm going to do is just get a small amount on the brush, so I only need a little bit of it, and then it's a matter of deciding whereabouts you want this kind of thing to be. So we're looking at things such as rivets, for example, having some of this streaking down from them, such as this one just here. All you do is just run it into this part, make sure there's not very much on there, and then just draw it downwards. So straight down from there, around about there, like that. Once you've got those core streaks on there, we're then ready to move on to the clean thinners, and with this what we're going to do is just start smudging these to make them look a little bit more realistic. So for example, this one here, what I'm going to do is just start painting downwards with those thinners and just letting it bite into it, and you'll see immediately it starts moving it. And this way we can streak it down, and by doing that we very easily get a really realistic effect. And with that, we've now got all those rusty streaks applied to the armour. As you've seen, doing that is really easy, and it looks great as well. And well, with that done, we can now move on to the next effect we're going to add, which is again a little bit further out, and now we're looking at more dusty sort of things. So in this case, we're looking for some exhaust fumes that will appear on the back of the engines and also on the grills around about there. For this, what we need is a pitch black, and we're just going to dry brush it on. So for this, what I've got is some Doom Death Black, though any pitch black will do. And I've got a Citadel small dry brush here now, because these bristles are softer than the one we were using earlier, which is vital for the technique that we're doing here. Because with this, you want a small amount on your brush, then really work it into the bristles on that tissue paper to remove the excess until you're getting about this sort of appearance on it. So you see it's quite a soft black we're now starting to get. And with it, what we want to do is slowly build it up on these parts. So for example, these grills that we got on the back just here, I want to just do a circular motion around here, because this way we get that soft build-up of this colour, so you get that nice sooty residue. So in these parts we want to go around like that, and then for the actual exhaust on top, we want to go around in this direction like this. Once you're happy with that sooty residue, the next thing we can add is some dust around the feet, and for this we're going to use 2 colours. First of all, some Steel Legion Drab, followed by some Rhinox Hide, and both these are going to be dry brushed on using the same brush used in the previous step, but just make sure it's completely clean before you do this. Starting out with Steel Legion Drab, we just need a little bit on the brush, and again just work it into the bristles, so we get rid of the excess and bring it down to around about this point here, see, so it's quite a soft appearance that we're getting on the texture of that paper. And then with this, what we want to do is start dry brushing it around the feet towards the bottom of the miniature. So we're looking at this sort of area around here, go for a circular motion facing straight at it, just steadily building it up, and then this way you see you get that nice sort of dusty appearance around the legs. Once you've finished building up that first coat, you're then ready to move on to Rhinox Hide, and with this we want much the same sort of technique, only focus just a little bit further down towards the ground. And with that, the dust is done on the legs, and so now ready for the final thing, which is going to be, of course, that blood. Now for this, we're going to start out with some blood for the blood god for the initial effect of it, but then in some areas we want to make it darker and retain that shine. So here what we're going to use is some Agrax Urshade gloss. And that'll give that a really sort of deep, gory kind of appearance to it. But first we need blood for the blood god, and there's a few ways of applying this, and it's really up to you exactly how much you do here. Just remember, like any weathering effect, once you get to the point where you're happy, stop there, because this paint's quite thick and quite lumpy, so you can't really paint over it once you've got it on there. So take your time and steadily build it up. The first thing I'm going to do is apply a little bit of blood to the drill arm that we've got. And for this, you can see I've got my monster brush, because with this, what I want to do, just get some on the palette just there like that. I'm actually going to thin it down a little bit too, just to make sure it's not too thick. And with this, we can steadily start building it up in the teeth of this drill. So we're looking at this sort of area around here. With it, what we can do is just start applying it, just dotting it on like this, so it's not consistent, and we get that sort of gory effect built up in the teeth. Now, the first coat of this is going to be a little bit weak, as you can see, but that's okay, because just let it dry, then do a second coat over the top, and it will build up the effect to make that red stronger in the areas where you want it to be stronger. Now, in addition, there's some other ways of applying this, and that's why I've got a few different brushes, because I've also got my size 0 here from our Stopus. And with this, what we can do is some more directed applications of it for particular effects that we want to have on there. So, for example, with this, what we can do is take a look at the blades on the other arm, and here we can give the impression of the movement of it as if something has just been snipped inside this arm. And to do that, what you do is look for your cutting edge and just apply a little bit along it, so this sort of area here, and then start flicking it down from it. So just working your way across like this, and this way you get that sort of splash of blood going up there, and you can just keep building it up steadily in that same motion. And once you've got that initial application on there, you can start dotting a little bit more on, a bit thicker, and this way we get that stronger effect of it as it's a little bit thicker towards the actual cutting edge. So along there like that, and you just mirror it on the other side. In addition, using this brush, what we can do is apply some arterial spray. So for example, if you want to have some going up the leg just here, what you do is angle it so almost like you're edge highlighting, and with the tip of the brush, just do a bit of a line of it. So we're kind of doing this sort of thing here, and we just build it up there like that. Once you've got that initial line on there, just make it a little bit thicker by dotting on a bit more. So we just want to start applying some underneath it. So kind of going like that. And then once it's on there, angle it so it's straight down, and then just do a few little trickles of it coming down from it. So we just want to have a few lines just dripping down there like that, as if it's like a large amount of blood that hit it, and then started dripping down since. So kind of along there like that. The final thing is one to certainly be careful with, and that is to flick a little bit of blood at it. And if you want to do that, what you need is a brush like a dry brush, and I've got a small dry brush here from Citadel. With this, what we want to do is just make sure it's damp first of all. Just get a little bit of that blood paint on there, and with it, all you do is just start flicking it at the miniature. So decide whereabouts you want it to be, such as towards the bottom of it, and just do a few little flicks with the bristles there like that to get a few little splashes onto the model. Once you're happy with that blood, you're then ready to move on to some Agrax Urshade gloss, and with this, what we're looking to do is just dot it in areas where we want the blood to be darker because it's thicker. So areas like there, for example, in amongst the teeth of this drill just here, and the blades we're looking at towards the tip of them. So areas such as just here, just little dots just to darken it down in some select areas. Now, once you've done this, your miniature is ready to be based, and as ever, it's entirely your choice how you base it, but in this case, I'm going to go for an urban rubble base to contrast really nicely with the white armour. And here we have the completed Leviathan Siege Dreadnought ready to continue its journey down the eightfold path to madness. So as you've seen when painting this Dreadnought, it's always a good idea to look for that initial sub-assembly to be able to access all the mechanical parts to get them all painted with silver and all the various other metallic colours in there. But once all that's done, it's really just a matter of painting all that armour to bring it up to the stage where you want to weather it. Now, as ever with weathering, just remember to build it up until you're happy and stop there, because it's much easier just to add a bit more if you want to. It's much harder to take it away though. So have fun painting your Dreadnought, and we'll see you again very soon.